Thanks for joining us here at KSOO. I'm Beth Warden and get the privilege to meet Tim Bjorkman, congressional hopeful for South Dakota. Thanks for being here today.
Great to be with you, Beth.
Yes, so you've got a lot of busy activities going on here. I'm just going to move the mic a little bit closer to you. I should have done that earlier. So you've been traveling the state of South Dakota. What are some of the issues that you're hearing from South Dakotans?
The single most predominant issue and concern is health care. I hear it, Beth, from families. I hear it from business owners, people who want to provide health care for their workers, and they simply can't afford to do that and pay a living wage. They struggle to pay their own health care. I hear story after story. I hear people who are seniors who fall into all kinds of financial pitfalls, even with Medicare, that can be devastating. So more than any other issue, it's that. The second thing is that I think people feel really powerless today, and they feel like they don't have an advocate for them in Congress. There's a strong sense that big money politics governs the votes of those who serve us, and they're very disillusioned and very concerned about what the future holds.
Okay. And why would you like to represent South Dakotans in Congress?
Well, to begin with, for that reason. I spent my whole life, I spent 25 years as an advocate, Beth, representing regular South Dakotans, small business owners, farmers, laborers, people pushed around by the system. And we need that kind of an advocate in Washington. Many of the things that I saw during my time on the bench were problems that are solvable in our country, but our politicians aren't getting to them. And so when I look out and look at the generation of our own grandchildren who are the 7th generation of Bjorkmans in this state, or my family line here, I'm very concerned for them. Because if we don't make some fundamental changes in how we run government, our grandchildren are going to face a very different America than the one that we know today.
Do you think that our government, our federal government, is broken?
I don't think it's broken. I think that it's dysfunctional, Beth. And there is a big difference. The problems that we face, the big problems, are solvable. I'm convinced of that, or I wouldn't have left the bench to do this. What we need is people with common sense who are willing to work across the aisles to solve our problems. That's the challenge that we face. And so dysfunctional in the sense that we have an extreme amount of partisanship today. And no small part of that, I believe, is fueled by the big money that dominates both parties in Congress, so that the voices of the special interests and the corporate interests are drowning out the voices of regular South Dakotans, regular Americans.
And so your background as a judge, how does that help you in this position as being a congressional hopeful and wanting to be serving in Congress?
Well, a few things that I would say. One thing about being a judge, you have no one else to blame for the decisions you make. You are required to make literally thousands of decisions every year that significantly impact other people's lives. And your calling is to do that in a way that's fair and impartial, that doesn't the decision can't rest on fear or favor of either party. And so that kind of decision making requires independent, fair, judicial thinking every time. And I think it's good training for a position like representing us in Congress, where we have to take into consideration all the factors and weigh them carefully and do what appears to be right for the majority of South Dakota. Now, the other thing is, my time, not only as a judge but as a lawyer, required me to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours in tax law, reading income tax returns, understanding business returns, farm returns, preparing returns for businessmen, farmers, regular working people, and dealing not just with tax law, but hundreds and probably thousands of laws that affect us every day. And so it's given me, I think, a broad experience and understanding of how law works, how it impacts us every day.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that we are aware of course, in South Dakota is a very strong Republican Party, and I know the Democrat Party just announced that they are expanding with opening a second office in Rapid City and trying to further their growth. What are your thoughts about the two-party system in South Dakota?
Well, first of all, I think that the best government comes from a strong two-party system. And I don't blame the Republicans. They're winning elections. That's what parties are supposed to do. I think it's the Democrats that need to be stronger. And I kind of view myself as more of an old-school Democrat. I focus on representing regular Americans, regular South Dakotans, small businessmen, farmers and ranchers, and trying to promote a progressive economic approach that'll help the middle class to stay strong. And the middle class is suffering seriously. Let's not cover that up. So when I look at the the party structure today, I think that we're suffering from a weak two-party system. And the other thing I want to say about that, though, is both parties nationally need to be very careful because people are very upset with them. Mm-hmm. You can look at the polls and see that, but you can talk to people. The people that I talk to are far less concerned about a political party today as a whole than who's going to represent them, who's going to be their voice, and who's going to hear them. My challenge when party registration is so vastly tilted toward the Republicans in this state is to address the people who might be inclined to be single
like a single party voter
to just vote down the party line. Mm-hmm. And we have, my campaign treasurer is Republican, for example, and we have a lot of the people who know me or when they get to know me from either party and from no party, I think, tend to respond more to my message because I think they see me as someone who will be an independent voice for South Dakota and not a sure vote for either the Republicans in Congress or the Democrats in Congress. And I think that's what's likely to distinguish me from other good people who want to seek office maybe on the Republican Party ticket today.
As we take a look at Congress and the budget, and there's always this luring, what's the word I'm looking for? There seems to be this thing off in the distance. If we don't get this figured out, we're going to have another government shutdown, and then there's this panic crisis mode of operation. Do you see a solution for that?
Well, yeah, I do. And first of all, it's another sign of dysfunction in Congress. These monies and this debt limit that's being addressed, these are monies that Congress already appropriated. Mm-hmm. So they already said it was all right to spend the money, but now we're going to debate whether there should be a shutdown. And it has to do with us not passing and approving budgets in a timely way. We've stopped doing that over the last decade or more. And so there are 12 or 13 parts of the budget, and they needed to be proposed and addressed in a timely way. It's more of the same that we've seen through Republican and Democratic administrations, Republican and Democratic congressional majorities. And one of the things that produces it, in my view, is the loss of moderates in Congress in both parties. There's a stunning decline in the Republican Party of the moderate Republican who has been beaten in primary after primary. Some of them simply retired rather than facing a primary challenge. Mm-hmm. The Democrats have had some of that of their own over the last decade or two. So that the vast middle, where most of us live, politically speaking, isn't being represented in Washington. Mm-hmm. those are the people that I want to go to serve, because we've got all these noises on both sides of the political extremes, and they do make a lot of racket, and they tend to be what divides us so much, and they tend to get their news from one source that plays into their own preconceived notions, and so all of that goes to make this highly partisan type of culture that our politicians have fallen into. And I think it's very destructive overall.
One of the things I remember learning just as a teenager in my government class was when a bill would be introduced, suddenly there were all these other bills that were tacked on that were random in a case that had nothing to do with the initial bill, and you had to pass or deny passage of all of them as a whole. Is that something that concerns you?
It does. I think in South Dakota we have a single topic law that
right.
The bills need to comply with, just or need to stick to one topic. I think that would be a good reform in Washington. But the problem lies more in the way that we have lost the deliberate, careful, thoughtful approach to legislating that we knew up until the last decade or so. Mm-hmm. And it's so typified in the tax bill that's before us now. The last tax overhaul happened in 1986 in the Reagan administration, Beth, and it was passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. And the reason is that the majority party actually worked with the president and the other party in Congress to try to come up with something that would have a broader consensus, which is the wise way to govern, especially with something as monumental as a tax overhaul. Businesses, individuals need predictability to know what the law is going to be over the years ahead. And so it's important that those laws get passed with a much broader consensus of support than simply a slim majority of one party trying to cram it down, which is what we saw here. Mm-hmm. In the 86 tax bill, I think Congress worked on that about a year and a half. And it provided across-the-board tax cuts for all Americans. And that's one of the reasons it enjoyed bipartisan support. The other part of it was the purpose was to make it revenue neutral and to lower rates and close loopholes. In fact, President Reagan said he would veto any legislation that created a deficit. Now, our Republican majority leaders in the House and Senate also said this legislation would be revenue neutral, but it turned out to be anything but that, and they're using all kinds of gimmickry to keep the real estimated deficit busting nature of it lower than it actually is, because it's going to be something like $2 to $2.5 trillion by the best estimates.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously you are very concerned for representing South Dakotans and very passionate about our government and our country. Any final words that you'd like to share today?
Well, I just think that the biggest message to take forth to people is that there's nothing really wrong in America that we can't solve. But it's going to take people who come from outside of government, because we're not going to change Washington by sending more career politicians there. Real change is going to have to come from outside the system. That's why I left the judiciary, where I had another decade that I could have served, and am working without pay this year to try to bring some real change to Washington, because I'm afraid that if we don't, that we're not going to get the kind of common sense, independent decision makers there who will stand up to the corporate money and fight for regular South Dakotans. And so I think that we should all pay very close attention to this political campaign, not just the congressional race, but all the races that are going on across South Dakota. Take some time to get to know the candidates, understand them, talk to people who know them, and make sure that the person that we're selecting is one who's going to represent all of us and be the kind of advocate that'll make us proud.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
It's good to be with you, Beth. Thanks for having me.
And you can find out more by visiting his website. It's timbjorkman.com. Did I get that right?
That's right.
All right. Thanks for being here.
You can visit us on Facebook also at
Okay.
Tim Bjorkman for South Dakota or Tim Bjorkman for Congress.
Well, thank you for being passionate about serving South Dakota and our country.
Thank you, Beth.